Do you want to be good at Minecraft building, but right now you are absolutely terrible? Do all of your friends look at your build and then spit on your shoe and laugh in your face? Do your builds look like an iguana just ran across your keyboard like 20 times? Do you build like the architect that made whatever this thing is supposed to be? A house, I think. Do you imagine yourself building something like this, but when you try to build, it comes out like this unfortunate build? Well, if your Minecraft builds look like this and you want to get better at building, then this series is for you. Welcome to episode 1 of Jinx's building guide, overview and build process. I am today's host. I'm Jinx. I build things in Minecraft. Not things that look like this, but you know, I used to. There was a time when this is what I built and it looked kind of like this, and I've gotten a little better since then. Welcome to my current build testing world, and you can see parts of builds that I've made here. Not complete usually, since I finished building them in survival, but here is a few images of a few other builds I've made so you can determine if I'm qualified enough to teach you. But yeah, if you want to take your builds from looking like this to this, then stick around and watch this video because we're going to try and do that today. Just a quick disclaimer that this is only episode 1 in what will be a probably pretty long series in how to build, and this is just for building process and overview. So while I think this is definitely the most helpful building tip that I'll give you in the building guide, there will be a lot of videos to follow. So this video isn't going to cover everything because I'm not going to make a 10-hour video. Nobody wants to watch that. But of course, if you want to see all of my building guide videos and all the building tips that I have, then consider subscribing because I'll make more and then you'll only get notified and stuff. But that's enough dilly-dallying from me. Let's just try and get into it. So again, today's video is about my building process and kind of a building overview. So we're just going to go step by step on how I build from beginning, which looks something like this, to the ending, which looks something like this. So let's start with step 1. The first step in building any good build is brainstorming. You need to know what you're gonna build, or else you can't build anything to begin with. So you have to start with brainstorming. Now, we should all know how to brainstorm. If you're a person who's taken like any middle school English classes, we probably have gone over a lot of brainstorming in your lives. I know I did. And so you should know how to brainstorm already, but I will kind of explain the way I tend to go about brainstorming builds, and hopefully that might help. Usually when I'm brainstorming, I just kind of imagine what the build's gonna look like in my head. I feel like I'm pretty creative when it comes to that. I just kind of have an idea of what I want to build to look like in my head, and then that's pretty much the entire brainstorming process, and I go from there. But there's definitely other ways to do it. It's like if you find a building or something that looks cool online, you can use a reference photo. I've done that before, and then just try and emulate that build in the game. Otherwise, you can just kind of mess around and start placing some blocks down and see if it gives you any good ideas. And there's not too much advice I can give for brainstorming because, I mean, well, it's just pretty much brainstorming. We all know how to brainstorm, right? But the main idea is that you want to know kind of what you want the build to generally look like. You at least need to know the vibes of the build you're going to be going for, because if you start building with no plan, typically what happens is you end up with something like what is behind me right now. And so the brainstorming step is important, but I really don't have anything else to say about it because, it's just brainstorming. Block palettes are very important for building, and the reason that they're important is because you really need to figure out how an idea that you might have in your head is actually going to translate into Minecraft blocks. Or if you're doing something like using reference photos, again, those photos of real buildings are going to be real buildings, and they're not going to be made out of Minecraft blocks, so you have to figure out before you start building how you're going to translate that building into Minecraft block build. And the best way to do that is to use a block palette, and this also just helps you kind of get an idea of how you're going to use blocks before you even start building. It makes it so much easier and faster. What a block palette is very, very simply a collection of blocks that it makes up a build. So for example, on this building over here, I created this block palette before I started building, where I picked out a bunch of blocks that looked good together that I knew I was going to use on the build, or at least anticipated using on the build. Not all of them made it. And so I took the blocks in this block palette and I turned it into this build right here. Or at least this is part of the build. The rest of the build is here in my forever survival world. If you aren't watching that series, then do that also. Bang! Here it is. Don't mind the dirt in the front door. Creeper may or may not have exploded that. Another example over here, I picked out these blocks, which I then used for this build, but it's just picking out blocks that look good together. And so I have created a block palette for a build I'm going to do today, and I'm going to kind of just explain the process of how I build this as I go along. So this is the first step. Before I get a build, this is what I have. The way that you know a block palette works is you just get blocks out and you just put them on the ground, like what I've done here. There's not a really good strategy to it. Just find a block, put it on the ground, put another block next to it, see if they work well together. So for example, I don't know what blocks look good together. I mean, I do, but I'm pretending to be a person who's bad at building, like you maybe. And so now I don't know what blocks work well together. So I have some blocks in my inventory I might think are cool blocks. And so I'm going to kind of lay them out and just see if I think they look good together. Now, to be honest with you, this isn't as bad as I was expecting it to be. But I look at this now and I think, you know, maybe in a certain weird stylized build this would be okay, but generally speaking, these blocks look terrible together. So if you lay down a bunch of blocks and you look at it and you're like, wow, that stinks, then lay down different blocks and see if it looks better. I mean, I'll sit here sometimes and just be like, okay, well, oak wood looks nice with pale moss, and these look good together. These could be some blocks that these all look nice together, and then I'll lay down some other blocks and I'll be like, ooh, don't like that block. Let's not use this. And this is, oops, I just grabbed a whole bunch of jungle logs, and I'll just kind of try blocks that I kind of think are cool or that I might want to use. And I just put them on the ground and see if they look good together. And if not, I delete them and pick another block out. Basically, I just described what trial and error is, but yeah. As time goes on, you kind of learn what blocks work well together and which ones don't, but definitely try to be experimental and pick some fun blocks out every once in a while, like this beehive, for example, or this terracotta, which is kind of purple, and I put it with a brown wall, and it creates an interesting little gradient there. I'll get more specific and dive a bit deeper into block palettes and which blocks look good together in a separate video, but again, this is just an overview, so I'm going to kind of gloss over it quickly. But as I said, this is the block palette right here that I picked out for today's build. And so to kind of explain exactly what this block palette means, besides just thinking these blocks work pretty well together, these right here are going to be the walls of the build I'm going to make. But anyway, there's going to be two sections. One is going to be yellow, like out of these blocks right here, and the other section is going to be this kind of purpley brownish color, and the walls are just going to be framed out by these spruce logs. These 4 blocks right here are going to make up the base of the build. There's a word for that, but I can't remember what it is. The foundation, that's right, that's the one. The foundation. These are going to make up the foundation of the build. And then these, as you may have guessed, are going to make up the roof right here. This is going to be a bit of a chimney coming out of it. It can be hard sometimes to see the vision of a build when you just have a few blocks sitting there, but this, at the very least, I can step back and say, I think that these colors and textures will work. Everyone's different, so your block palettes may not look exactly like mine. It doesn't matter how you structure it. I don't even structure all mine the same. A lot of them are just kind of, they're either in blobs or I make them in strips like this. Just put the blocks next to each other so I can kind of see which blocks work well together. Now, most of the time I'm a little bit intentional about where I'm placing these blocks, so I put them in a gradient flow. Like, for example, I kind of want the yellow blocks to be in this order. Near the top of the build, I want to have these darker terracotta, yellow terracotta blocks, and it's going to make its way down to the brightest block, which I guess is technically this wool block right here, but it transitions really nicely into this beehive right here. And so as you can see, they make up a gradient on both sides, and so I kind of want to keep the blocks mostly in this order, so I'm a bit intentional about the ordering. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. I think this is a very straightforward concept, so let's get into the next part. Wire framing. This one is where the build actually begins. I will be using these blocks to plan out my big shapes and then going in to fill in the walls and stuff and detailing. So let's explain what I mean here. So I might start with the foundation. It's a square, or actually this is a rectangle, not a square. I'm not very good at geometry, but whatever. I mean, a rectangle. I know that I want the foundation to be 3 blocks tall, and so now we have a 3-dimensional rectangle, or whatever those are called, rectangular prism, I think that's the word. And so now after the foundation, I build another rectangle. This rectangle is going to be where the walls are. This step is really important because you don't want to build an entire wall and then realize you've made your build horribly disproportional, you know? And so here I have this first section that's going to be the yellow section of the building, and I'm just kind of eyeballing it, as you can kind of see here. I think that these builds are proportional enough. They look about how I imagine them in my head. If I made this like way too wide or something, as you can see, I did make it too wide initially, and so I kind of shortened it a little bit. You can just look at it and be like, wow, that's too wide. And it does not take a lot of work if you're doing this in order to shrink it back down. And this is going to be the other section that I think I'm going to hold up on stilts. I think that'll be cool. And then the roof will probably be somewhere around here. And so you can see this is kind of the proportions of the build I'm looking at. And this is an example, I think, based on looking at this, that this roof is going to be a little small. So I might extend it by a block to make it larger, just because I didn't like the way, I felt like this big section was too small in comparison with this over here, and raising the roof right there, I think helps even that out. And so this is what this step is really for. You can just kind of take a step back and look at the overall shape of a build after really just breaking a build down, and it's a lot easier to make adjustments this way. The reason this step is called wireframing is, of course, because it kind of, I mean, it's obvious. Never mind, everyone knows. It's because it looks like a wireframe. Wow. But as you can see, you can kind of start to envision what this build might look like. These are the basic shapes of the build. So now I have something here, and this isn't an overwhelming task, right? When you compare it to a build like this that has all of this detail and stuff, it looks overwhelming. How do you even get started on a build like this, right? Well, you get started like this. You get started by building out this wireframe of the build, and it's just a much more realistic task to accomplish, I would say. This is like the outline of a drawing whenever you get started. You don't want to start by filling in the color. You want to start by doing the outline first. It just makes the whole build a bit easier to visualize. And so this is all the step is. I am building in the biggest, most basic shapes that I possibly can. Once again, I will get more into this in detail in a separate video when I talk about building specific shapes and how to make your builds interesting by changing the shapes of the build. So without making this video an hour and a half long, I'm going to have to move on to Step 3 is filling in the walls, and this step is literally exactly what it sounds like. There will not be a separate video on this topic. All I'm going to do is take a block that is going to be the primary block that makes up all of the walls, and I'm going to literally just fill it in without one block. You may be tempted to skip straight to a textured wall like this, but that can be really overwhelming, so you probably just want to start with the block that makes up most of the wall. Like on this build, I started with these tough bricks, and I ended up putting so many other blocks in there, you may not be able to tell, but I filled this entire wall with tough bricks, and then I went in and textured it later, because breaking it up into 2 steps, it makes it'll just make your life way easier. Same thing you can see here, since this build's incomplete, since I finished it in survival, I filled in the walls with bricks, and later went in and textured with all this other stuff. So I'm going to do the same thing for this build. Like, for example, I kind of want to use this, I know I want to use this polished andesite as a column for this lower section here, or whatever, I forgot the word, foundation, for the foundation, and so I'm going to fill the rest of the wall in with these other blocks, and I'm just going to start by filling it in entirely with stone bricks. I know I want this section to be yellow, so I'm going to fill in with the yellow blocks. This is a really easy task you can start with, and, you know, texturing the build without first laying out just a very basic block it'll be difficult. It's hard to wrap your brain around. This just helps you visualize it a bit better. So again, a really simple step, and that's actually it for this step. And boom, color is here. Just to kind of reiterate the importance of this step, this is like when you're doing a coloring book and you don't do any shading, but you just drop in the color, I don't know, fill tool. That's essentially what this is. I can start to add detail on top of this. It's important to work big to small. So we started with the outline, and now we're going to fill it in, and we can move on and get more and more detailed from there. But if you start max detail, you're just going to overwhelm yourself. And this is really all there is to this step. Again, it's very simple and straightforward, so let's move along. This next step, which is maybe step 4, or I don't know, I forgot. But anyway, whatever the next step is my favorite step of all of them, and that is texturing the build. As you can see on these other builds I've made in here, I really like texturing. I like adding a lot of blocks, and most of the detail that's in my builds is really just texture. A lot of blocks. This is something that really elevates your building to the next level. If you look at the example of the terrible build that I made at the beginning, you'll notice that there's not much for texture going on here. It's all cobblestone, and I, for some reason, decided to have this random spruce strip or whatever, I guess. I don't know, but there's no real texture here. There's nothing in the roof. It's all spruce. So let's start at the foundation. I remember the word this time, and as you can see, I picked all these blocks already from the block palette, and so I know what I'm going to be doing down here for the texture. And so again, I know I'm going to use these andesite blocks as columns kind of for the texture, and so these other 3 blocks are going to be the ones I'm mostly using to texture these walls. I'm not going to get too specifically into texturing in this once again because I just don't have time. There is a lot, well, that's weird, but very basically you can texture by just trying to make the build look random. I'm really just going to try and make it look random, and I'm going to put details on top of this, so it's not super important. What you don't want to necessarily do for texturing, just as a bit of quick advice, is try and mix it up like this. This doesn't really look that good. It doesn't look terrible, but you want blocks to be more grouped together when you're texturing something. Kind of like this. You can see how the blocks are more in groups now, more together. Again, there's a lot that goes into texturing, so there will be videos about texturing in the future too that get more specifically into this step and how to do it. You just kind of want to keep placing the blocks until it looks random. General overview, try and make it look random. If you step back and you notice like you're doing a pattern, like maybe you're trying to texture and you get a checkers board, which is pretty common to do when you just start getting into texturing, this doesn't look random, and so you might want to go back in and just clump them together more, kind of like so. The other very general broad piece of advice I have for when it comes to texturing is to build in gradients, and you can see I set it up here already, so you can kind of go like darkest to lightest and darkest to lightest, and that will help a lot as well. So you can kind of see on this gradient how it is random looking, and you do want to make it look random, but it's also going from dark to light, or light to dark. I guess it depends on which way you're looking at it. The other thing to keep in mind about texturing is it can look jarring at first, but when we cover it with details, it will not look nearly as jarring as this is. It also is difficult to create a smooth yellow gradient. We will throw a lot of details on top of this, and you won't really pay much attention to it once there are more details on top of it. Voila! Texturing is done. And you can really see how this has taken the build to a higher level than what it was before. It went from looking not so great to pretty good instantly. It can be very tempting when you're just starting to just build out of like stone bricks entirely and maybe spruce planks. You really should try and experiment with other blocks. And the way I found this block palette was, again, is just experimenting, right? That's what this is for. Try some things and add more blocks to your builds. It will help so much. It'll make you look way better at building just by texturing. But let's move on to the next thing. At this point, I have absolutely no idea what step we're on, but the next step is big details. I like to break my detailing up into 2 phases, big detail and small detail. What big detail is, well, I guess big details. For example, windows, where windows are, where doors are, staircases and porches on the outside, chimneys, big stuff like that, right? For example, say I want to put a window right here and right here. Say I want to put the front door of this house just like right here, and then from there I just kind of want to have a staircase running down the side. I know I want to put a chimney somewhere right about here, so say I put a chimney right here. I know also that I want to put some stilts down here. Not exactly sure how I'm going to do that, but I think just something like this might work okay. Maybe just something kind of like this. Very, very, very simple detailing. Big details. I don't need to know what all this stuff is going to look like exactly yet. I just need to generally plan out where the details are going to be, the things that will spice up the build. And really with this particular build, now that I'm looking at it here, I think I want to keep the big details pretty limited and just do the absolute necessities, because to be honest with you, I think that the color and the interesting shape of this build are going to do enough heavy lifting to where I don't have to add a lot of intricate details. But I'm going to give a few more examples of other big details on builds that I've done around here, not just this one. So, for example, on this church build, the big details would be things like these columns right here, or these windows right here, right? On the windmill, obviously, we'd have this big fan. That would be a big detail, like the doorway, maybe these columns going up the side. On this build, big details, again, like windows, doorway, stairwell, this pathway going across the other doorway, stuff like that. These are big details. Things that would be considered small details, which we'll get into a little bit more, would be maybe something like these nether brick fences in front of the window, or, you know, this thing, whatever, I don't even know what this would be called, but this pattern kind of going up the side of this tower here, or, you know, these fences going up the side, or this little like ornamental looking thing. I don't know what any of this is called architecturally, but whatever this would be called, this ornamental looking doodad, would be a small detail. All these vines and leaves and stuff would be a small detail. Maybe the iron bars and trap doors and these walls and you know, stuff like that that are small details. Not going to worry about those yet. We'll get a bit more into that on this build specifically, but I'm just going to kind of finish up the big details first, and we will move on, because I don't think there needs to be too many details. I think this build's interesting enough as is. A quick note, it is important not to overcomplicate your builds sometimes. Like, this is not a super complex build. We saw the whole process, right? It's like 3 shapes. It's 2 rectangles and whatever this shape is called, and like 4 windows and like a doorway and a staircase, right? It's very simple. You don't have to overcomplicate it because there's enough going on here already to make it interesting. And when it comes to detailing, there's so much to talk about. When it comes to detailing, I'm going to have to do separate videos, multiple videos on different kinds of details and how I go about it. Because if I tried to cover everything here, again, 12-hour video. Small details. This is where the build is going to really be polished and finalized, because it's definitely got a lot of structure, but it's definitely missing some things, and that's what we're going to do now, and this is going to make the biggest difference out of anything I've done, and this is important. So I'll go through the small details I put on this build to hopefully give people an idea of kinds of details you can add, but again, this is going to be multiple videos worth of content, so stick around with the channel if you're interested. But I think the first thing I'm going to do is remove this trim, because this wood trim is ugly, and I'm going to replace it with these. This is also the step in the building process where you might make a few small changes. Because this is finalizing, this is where you can really start to get picky with your own build. So instead of having that big chunky frame, I'm going to just use some trapdoors down here, and I like this a lot more. While we're up here on the roof, I'm going to be using some barrels to try and make this roof trim at the top here a bit more interesting looking. And then because I'm not a huge fan of exactly how barrel-y these barrels look, which, I mean, they are barrels, so it makes sense, I'm just going to slap some signs down on them to try and hide it a little bit, but I do want this texture to be a little bit prevalent, and I do like this more. And again, this step can be chalked up to trial and error, as with all of the steps, kind of. I also like to add some windows, and I am, first of all, an avid fan of glass panes, and I am also an avid fan of using different color windows to try and make the windows look a little bit more interesting. Something useful to think about when it comes to detailing is that you want to try and add details that are realistic. You don't want to just start putting random blocks in places with no real intention behind them. So kind of what I mean by this, for example, is I want to add shutters to these windows, which is just as simple as doing something like that. And this detail right here is a very realistic detail because houses have shutters on them. I think I'm going to have one of them be open. Wow! This is what I mean by realistic details. Details that you would expect to see on a house. I would expect to see shutters on a house, and so adding shutters to the house makes sense. Another thing I might do is try and bulk out this bottom section, this foundation, a little bit more, because it does look a little bit small still in proportion to this house, and I want it to be smaller than this top section, but I can bulk it out a little bit, I think, just by maybe doing something like this. Just can use these stairs and walls to bulk this out just a little bit, and you can see that gives it some much needed thickness, I would say. I imagine this border is logs, so I might make these logs extend a little bit further out, maybe like something like this. Another kind of realistic detail to add is maybe some stone buttons on the edge. These look like they might be some kind of bolt that holds the logs together. And one of my favorite little details to add, and this really is just an ornamental thing, is to kind of add, alternate, I should say, trapdoors and signs over these logs. This is definitely not like a realistic or useful detail, but there is ornamental details on houses, and I think this looks cool. And there are definitely exceptions to every rule, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. To make these windows a bit more special, I might add some looms down here. I find these columns to be somewhat boring, so I'm going to stick with my barrel theme and add some more barrels in there. Maybe I'd like to add a bit of an overhang over this door, and so I think I'll do that by using a campfire. I also think this area of the house could use something, and seeing as I don't know exactly what to add, it never hurts to add another window. Adding windows is like a cheat code. If you don't know what to do on an area of a build, just add another window. It always works. And you'll notice that a lot of the exact same kind of detail will start to make a build look way better. I have this neat little crossbar here, but maybe I can add a couple trapdoors to break this up even more. I could throw campfires on top of the chimneys so I can get a bit of a smoke effect, and then I can just kind of surround the campfire with trapdoors, and boom, it disappears. And also a block on top. You can still see the smoke coming out of there, so I think that's a really nice touch. Nice. I will also add more signs. It never hurts to add signs and trapdoors in areas you feel might need it, and I think that is a nice addition right there. I'm going to spice up this roof in a very similar way to the way I spiced up the other roof, just by doing something like this here. Maybe hang the roof over a bit on the back here, or maybe that looks stupid. This is also part of the building process, is adding a detail and then stepping back and being like, wow, that was horrible. Add a little bit of a railing in here, just like that. Another nice detail you can add are just some planters to surround some moss with some signs like they're holding it down, and then add some plants in there. This one could even be bulked up a bit with just a little bit more like ornamental type detail on there maybe. And you really don't need to add detail everywhere. You don't want to overcrowd the build. Just look how much more complete this is looking already with just these details that are added on. It's probably also a nice idea to maybe add a handrail to this staircase here, and some supports so that I can actually stand up. And really the rest of the detailing is probably going to be the same thing that I've already done here, so I'm going to wrap it up. And if I do add anything else, I'll explain it to you. Yeah, trying to get a good shot. This stupid thing is in the way. Get out of here. Rest in peace, color palette. I may rebuild you somewhere else. Who knows? Probably not, though, as I'm lazy. But as I was trying to demonstrate, voila, we have ourselves a lovely looking build now. I really didn't add too many more details than I added on camera. I'll show you what I did do, but it's basically the same thing. First thing to note is obviously the terraforming. I mean, this is mostly, I will go over terraforming separately. I'm not even going to talk about it at all today because terraforming is its own can of worms, which does not need to be opened right now. Outside of that, though, the only other details I really added was I did add a bit of a border around the stilts to kind of thicken up the bottom a little bit because it looked like the stilts were as thick as the build. And now it doesn't quite look like they're quite as thick as the build anyway, so I guess that worked. And then I made this chimney a little bit thicker in the back, and there's 2 chimneys, which there may have already been 2, I don't remember. I think it turned out really well. I'm actually really happy with this build. Oh wait, the other thing I did was that I created another strip of wood in the middle. I kind of divided this into 2 sections by adding another support in the middle there. I think it was just too much. It needed to be divided up a little bit, too much yellow. But anyway, yeah, that's it. I did it. That's the whole build. And it looks more detailed than it is. There's really not too many. I mean, we went over almost every small detail, right? It's shutters and windows, and this exact same trapdoor sign alternating thing that I do over and over again. Just a few supports around the bottom. Like, it's really not as much as it looks like. And I hope going step by step made making a build like this feel a little bit more doable and maybe not so overwhelming, you know? Now, I know I didn't get super specific in this particular video, and that's because this video is, again, it's kind of an introduction. It's a bit of a jumping off point and overview for a much larger series where I will get into very specific details about a build like this and very specific details about every single step. But you have to start somewhere, and I think knowing the process to build from is a very good thing to learn first. Because if you know the steps and you can kind of first come up with an idea, and then in order to turn that idea into a build, you know that you need to pick out the right colors, and then you can create the shape, right? And then you just fill it in, like real simple, right? And then you kind of texture it after that, and then you start adding details on top of that. If you know kind of how to do it step by step, it makes the thing seem less overwhelming. Now, knowing how to detail and how to texture and stuff is stuff we'll talk about, but that's also something that it's going to take some practice. And that is the biggest takeaway I want to make a point right now. You don't just get good by knowing how to build, and no matter what I say in the upcoming videos or have said today, the most important and best thing that you can do for your building is to just do it. Start placing some blocks. It's not going to look as good as you might want it to at first, but the more builds you make, the better they will get. Again, I have been building for years. I've built hundreds of Minecraft builds, hundreds and hundreds of Minecraft builds, a lot. So my biggest piece of advice and the best encouragement I can give is to just try building some stuff. Stop watching those tutorials that are block by block tutorials, because those are not going to help you at all. So you could improve a build like this with every step individually that I showed in this video. Maybe just a bit more brainstorming could help. Heck, I mean, just a box with a triangle on top of it is maybe not the most creative house that you can come up with. Look for reference photos. Try and find something more interesting than a box with a triangle on it. Maybe a bit of work on the block palette, for example. Maybe instead of just using spruce, wood, and cobblestone, which, I mean, I know those are everyone's favorite blocks, but maybe instead of just using those, we try a few different blocks. Maybe some yellows, maybe some browns, you know, stuff like that. Maybe shape, maybe a tower on this Just can you imagine a tower or a big fireplace on the side or something to make it more interesting? Or just some texture? Maybe you just mix in some mossy cobblestone or some stone brick or, you know, whatever. Or a few extra details like some shutters, glass panes instead of glass blocks, maybe lanterns instead of torches, for example. Finding your build style involves a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error. This build is one that I placed a lot of blocks and then immediately deleted them, and that's not necessarily in this video, but it will happen. If you place a block and you don't like it, delete it and place a different block. That's the main thing. So hopefully your friends won't laugh on your face and spit on your shoe anymore if that's a thing that they did in the first place. That never happened to me. That's not a personal experience or anything, I promise. If you have any specific questions, feel free to leave comments. I might make entire videos about them, or heck, I mean, I could just answer the comment maybe if they're easy enough. But this is just a little bit of a taste, a sample of things that are to come. So subscribe if you want to keep up with the series, because I'm going to be putting out a ton of videos where we're really going to dive into the meat of how to build. We're going to get way deeper. I'm going to talk in detail about all this stuff. I kind of glossed over everything because, again, this is an introduction. It's an overview, just a build process. It might leave you wondering, well, I still don't know how to texture, so that was useless. But you will soon if you subscribe. That is really all I have today, and I hope that I helped improve your build. And if I did, make sure to like the video. And if I didn't, also like the video because I need the views. Please, please. Also check out my Forever World series if you liked this video, because I think that those videos are better. This is also my first real tutorial video, so if you have any questions about anything that you think was unclear, I will try and be as helpful as possible, and I will try and answer questions to the clearest of my ability. But I really don't have anything else to say. I'm just dragging it at this point. So see y'all later. See y'all in the next building guide.